Hello everyone, my name is Walter Smith. I'll be your instructor in this course. It's a CRJ 100 Introduction to Criminal Justice. I want to start this course off with a little exercise, and I ask you all to bear with me. Close your eyes just for a moment and think about the words criminal justice. When I say those words, what are the first things that come to your mind? To some people, they see a picture of a police officer running into a burning building to save a child. Some people picture a hostage negotiator working tirelessly through the hours, trying to get some hostages out of a building before some bad things happen. Some people will picture an FBI profiler working the streets trying to make sure the serial killer doesn't get his next victim. Some people might think of the court system, a judge, a prosecutor, a defense attorney trying to make sure that people's rights are upheld and that the right course of action is taken and the right person is found guilty and punished justly. Some people might think of a correctional officer working through the hours trying to make sure that the correctional institution is safe. Others might think of a correctional counselor working with an inmate trying to figure out what went wrong and how they can fix it so that person can have a better, more productive life once they're let out of the prison. Some people may have a completely different picture enter their mind. Some people might think of a case of police brutality that maybe they've experienced themselves, known someone who has experienced, or seen in media. Some people might think of a wrongful conviction story they heard, where someone was wrongfully convicted for a crime they didn't commit through faulty evidence or a botched investigation. All of these are accurate representations of the criminal justice system as it stands today. The picture that you pictured in your mind's eye was not created in a vacuum. It's the result of years of experience, communication with other people, sharing of ideas, cultural, religious beliefs, things you've seen in the media, things you've seen on television. All these things shape how we view the world and how we see the criminal justice system. Now, this isn't a perfect system, and it really can't be, because it's conducted by people. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to make it a perfect system. And one way we do that is by listening to each other. And in this class, we're going to do a lot of listening to each other. We're going to hear other people's experiences, other people's points of view that are shaped by different experiences and different communications and different interactions than you may have had in the past. They may challenge the thoughts and perceptions you have about the criminal justice system. But I ask that you embrace each other's different ideas, different ways of looking at the justice system. Because only by truly listening to each other can we hope to achieve a more perfect system. As a matter of fact, I would argue it's the greatest thing that any college class can do for a student. Whether it be a criminal justice course, a psychology course, or a mathematics course. It's to introduce you to new ideas and new ways of looking at things and new experiences from people. Opening your mind and broadening your horizons is always going to be an important part of a well-rounded education, and it's going to be essential to you understanding the criminal justice system. One of the main questions we have to ask ourselves in this class is, what is the purpose of government? I mean, why do we even want a government? Why do we want a group of people setting up somewhere, deciding what laws and regulations I'm going to have to follow? And if I don't follow this set of laws and regulations that they pass, I can be fined, imprisoned, put to death. Why would I want a government to tell me what to do? After all, aren't we a country built on the idea of freedom to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? A country that's built on the idea that I should have individual freedom to pursue my dreams and my happiness without other people coming in and infringing on that? So in that context, why would we even want a government to come in and tell us how we need to live our lives and how we need to operate our lives? Well, because you can't really be free without some constraints. And I know that sounds a little crazy on first pass, but hear me out. If I'm allowed to collect as much happiness and wealth and all the rest for myself as I want, and so is my neighbor and my neighbor's neighbor, what's to keep my neighbor or my neighbor's neighbor from saying one day, you know what, I've accumulated all this wealth and happiness, but I want more. And there's Walter's little piece of property, and there's his wealth, and there's his happiness. Let's go in and take that and add to mine. I'm going to be a lot more happy when this is done, but me as the victim, I'm sitting over here in my property that's just been robbed, destroyed, whatever, thinking, what happened to my happiness? What happened to my ability to be free and to pursue life, liberty, and happiness? Now, in older cultures, what we would do was take it upon ourselves to go over and then take back what is rightfully ours, or to take from them a punishment amount for the injury that they had sustained to me. But then you're really still creating a system whereby somebody's in power. It's just whoever's the strongest and can take the most stuff and keep you from taking the stuff back. So we really need a governmental system, at least at some capacity, to protect our property, our lands, our sources of happiness. So we do need some form of government to protect our interests, both foreign and domestic. But how do we create a government when we know that everyone is interested in their own self-advancement and interests? Everybody is an egotistical person who is only interested in furthering their own gains, and will do so, according to Jeremy Bentham, at the destruction of everybody else around us. If we understand this selfish principle, how can we form a government that will protect us and will not just put somebody in power that will oppress us? Well, we do so by using this selfish principle to build a governmental system that actually uses the selfishness of people to make the best decisions for everybody. The way we do that is, first thing, we make everybody electable, answerable to the people. If you want to be elected again, if you want to hold your office, if you want to be successful in government, then you better do what we want you to do, because if you don't, you're not going to be the senator again. You're not going to be the congressman again. You're not going to be the president again. So that's the first and fundamental part of the puzzle, is making everybody answerable to the people. The second part of this puzzle is that we make sure that every branch of government is being looked upon by the other branch of government, that there's oversight, that there's checks and balances. So if legislation passes a law, the executive branch has to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, he can veto it back to the Congress, and the Congress can then decide if they want to try to pass it by a large veto-proof majority, because again, we don't trust the president as one individual to be able to make a decision as to whether or not something's a law either. Once it becomes a law, the judicial branch then can step in under certain conditions and say, this law is unconstitutional. It doesn't meet the requirements of the founding Constitution. It doesn't fit within those parameters, and therefore it's null and void and no longer enforceable. The legislative branch, let's start with it to kind of give another example of just how we use this selfish principle to build a good government. We have two branches within our legislature. We have a House of Representatives and a Senate. House of Representatives are elected based on the population of the district from which the representatives come from. Those change over time as populations change. It gets a little confusing. So let's start with the Senate, because the Senate is a lot easier to understand and illustrate this next point. Every state has 2 senators. So there's 100 senators, 2 from each state. 50 states, that's 100 senators. No more, no less. Let's say there's a piece of legislation going through the Senate, and this is a piece of environmental legislation, and it's going to impact whether we as a country use more coal for powering plants or natural gas. Based on the selfish principle, you would expect that senators from coal country to vote for coal being the main producer of energy for our nation. Because, and they're going to argue about a lot of environmental things, but the real reason is probably going to be under the selfish principle. The real reason is going to be that there's going to be a big economic boom because their families are going to get jobs in the coal mines, ancillary businesses are going to pop up around the coal mines, and it's going to be really productive. The people from their home state are going to really like that and re-elect them. The people from a state that's producing natural gas is going to argue environmental and a whole bunch of other stuff, but according to the selfish principle, the real reason they're going to vote for natural gas is for the same reasons that the coal country voted for coal. It's going to be, we want jobs in our community, and our community is going to respond really well to that, and it's going to get me reelected. And so it's the rest of the senators that make the decision as to whether or not this legislation gets passed on. Those senators are answerable to the states that elected them. If the states are not in favor of the decision that their senator made, then they can be answerable at the next ballot box. And so theoretically, the majority of Americans are represented in this bill because the majority of senators voted on it who have to answer to a greater majority of American citizens. Now, it's the Supreme Court's job to decide whether or not the actions taken by the President or the bills passed by the legislature conform to the constraints of the U.S. Constitution. This is the ultimate legal document of the United States of America, and everything done within the U.S. needs to conform to the U.S. Constitution. When the U.S. Constitution was first written, it was rejected by the states. And this was because it did not provide protections to the American people, and so they included the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Since then, many other amendments and many more rights have been given to the American people. It is the Supreme Court's job to make sure that those rights are upheld and that the fundamental protections of our government and our democracy are not trampled upon. And therefore, our founders decided that the judiciary should not be elected. And in the federal system, we do not elect judges. They're appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So there's oversight there. But still they're answerable to the people, even though they're lifetime appointments. In that if you don't like the people that the president is appointing, you can elect a new president. If you don't like the support or non-support being given to those nominees by the legislature, then you can always elect a new senator. If you do like it, then you can support that senator by re-electing them in the following election. But the judicial branch needs to be separate because it needs to look out for the minority. It needs to make sure that everything's confined to the Constitution, even if that's not the popular opinion at the time. Even if that's not what's being supported by the majority of Americans at that time. This slide was included just to kind of show the complexity of the criminal justice system and the complexity of the subject that we're going to be talking about in this semester. A lot of people see criminal justice and they think of a simplistic system where a person gets arrested, goes to court, gets tried, gets charged, goes to a correctional facility, serves their time, and then is released back into the population. That's very rarely the case. And as you can see by this graphic, there's lots of jumping off points throughout the process where people can go into different diversionary areas and different ways they can exit or enter the criminal justice system. This is another way in which our criminal justice system is just a little bit complex. We don't really have one criminal justice system, as most people would perceive when we say we're going to study criminal justice. We have actually 52 systems. We have the federal system, we have the District of Columbia, and then we have 50 states, all operating simultaneously. Sometimes we do things a little differently, and those differences can cause some confusion. For instance, in the state of Kentucky, and let's just stay at the state level, let's not go local level because it's just, again, for first pass, easier to understand. We have the Kentucky State Police. They handle all investigatory, highway patrol, any patrol duties, all the duties basically that a police department is going to handle runs through the state police. Our neighbors to the South Tennessee have the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, who handle investigatory responsibilities of state law enforcement. Then they have the Tennessee Highway Patrol that handles more patrol-related policing duties. And so there can be some confusion when two states are trying to work together as to what department do I call and how are things structured in your state. There's also confusion in that what we call things change from state to state. For instance, in Kentucky, we don't have theft as a law. We have theft by unlawful taking. That can be completely different than what some other state is calling that exact same action. So if we've got somebody crossing state lines, we're trying to communicate with them, sometimes that can be difficult, especially if it's a state not bordering us that we're not used to conversing with as much about these matters. There's also a confusion of state laws. Now, a law is only a law, and a crime is only a crime if you commit that crime during a time and in a place, a geographic area, where that action is illegal. And so what we have is in some states where marijuana use is legal, for instance, people in prison for smoking marijuana before the law changed and made it legal. That can get confusing. It can get confusing in that if I'm on a border state with another state that has legal marijuana laws and my state doesn't, I can step over across the border, smoke marijuana, and there's no punishment ascribed to it. If I step back over into this state, then I can be arrested for that same action. So that gets a little confusing. There's also differences in responses. For instance, sometimes about 9, 10 o'clock, my neighbors will shoot their guns. Now, it's not a big deal. I live in an area of Kentucky where it's pretty normal. It may be a little inconvenient when trying to put your 4-year-old to bed, but it's not that big of an inconvenience. Now, when they're shooting their guns, there's no police coming to see what's going on, what's wrong. I'm not overly concerned about it. I'm not running out to my yard to see what's going on, to see if I have to protect my family. But if I was in inner city Chicago or LA, some other larger city, then I may look at that action just a little bit different. Police would probably come and check and see why somebody's shooting a gun, because that's not what normally happens in those areas. So enforcement can change from place to place based on the expectations of the community that they serve. All this creates a very complex system. And in order to truly understand the criminal justice system, you really have to understand 52 different systems. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that in this class. Again, this is a broad overview class, and we're not going to spend a lot of time delving into any one area. But I just wanted to start you off with an understanding that this is a very complex subject, but one that we're going to look at very broadly, and I hope that we have fun in trying to understand just how these systems work together.